Welcome to the latest Instagram Live. I hope everybody's doing well, particularly now that the economy is starting to, I don't want to say it's reopening, it's kind of reopening as a patient that needs severe physical therapy. So think of the economy as somebody that was hit by a car, was in a coma for the past 2 months, and now in order for, they'll be fine, but in order for this economy to really get up and get back to normal, it's going to be in physical therapy for a while. It's going to have to take its time. It's going to have to take it slow. And the people who want to, get back to where they were before this economy shut down, just be patient. Everything's going to happen in good time. And I am optimistic things are going to come back to semi-normal. So here's what I think is going to happen. I think macroeconomically, the entire economy is going to get back to where it was. So the money will, we've lost $2 trillion in spending this past quarter, but the stimulus was $2 trillion, so that moves back into the economy. And then the next thing that has to happen is people have to be interested in spending. So the way that's going to happen is the Federal Reserve cut rates down, so that'll make people spend. But that'll take a little bit longer. Everyone's going to be a little nervous about spending the next few months. Not only are they going to be nervous about spending, but they're going to be nervous about going out, going to movie theaters, going to malls, going to restaurants, going to bars, even leaving their house to go to work or going to meetings. People aren't going to take public transportation as much. So there's a lot of things. Again, $6 trillion in stimulus is going to hit this economy, but where that money goes, if you lost $100, you're not getting $100. That $100 in stimulus might go somewhere else. So you kind of have to be on the lookout where the money is flowing, and that's where you have to position yourself. So obviously the money is flowing a little bit towards stimulus checks, unemployment insurance, small business loans, which, by the way, I'm not even so sure that these small business loans were a good idea. Again, it's something like 230 large public companies got small business loans. I just read this. Ammunition companies that sell bullets, they don't have to be small businesses to qualify for a loan. There's a loophole. You can be if you're an ammunition company, you could have up to 1,500 employees and still get a small business loan, as opposed to all the other businesses have to have 500 employees. Meanwhile, hotel chains no matter how big you are allowed to get small business loans. So, and a lot of these franchise chains like Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, they got the loan and then they had to return the money once people pointed it out and they were shamed into giving back the money. I doubt they would have given back the money if not for the shame factor. So Jay is on the line, or Jay is on there. If you have a question, don't be afraid to ask it to me and Jay will put it down. And so I wanted to talk about a few things. I think this coronavirus I've mentioned this before, but it's bringing out the best in people. It's bringing out the worst in people, like we see with, what's the so-called frontline healthcare workers. Obviously, it's bringing out hopefully the best in them. And then I just see a lot of people who I'm just really disappointed in. Like, don't let your political feelings of the moment make you decide what's right or wrong. Because even the politicians, they don't know what's right or wrong. Even the medical experts, they don't know what's right or wrong. We're kind of, think about the past few months. Even all of the experts, they've changed their opinions 1, 2, 5 times. So if you say, well, I'm always going to listen to this doctor, I'm always going to listen to this congressperson or this executive, they're gonna change their minds 3 or 4 times because we never dealt with a situation like this before. Should we have done the lockdown? Should we have done the economic shutdown? Who knows? We don't really know. There wasn't Sweden is the only test case. And by the way, last night, the World Health Organization actually stated that Sweden is the model for how a country should treat coronavirus. So Sweden had no economic shutdown. Their economy didn't suffer. Our economy is suffering huge. But should we have followed Sweden? Well, we couldn't really, because Sweden has the Swedish people, I guess, don't like to touch each other so much. So they have this natural social distancing. But maybe, most of the states in the United States probably should not have had an economic shutdown, but everybody was overly cautious. They assumed the worst case scenario, which was never realistic, but they assumed it. But New York City and New Jersey together still have more cases and more deaths than the other 48 states combined. So if you were in one of these states that had like 5 million people but only 100 deaths, you probably didn't need to shut your economy down. Even Georgia, where's Georgia at these days? Georgia, when they opened up, they had 10 million, a population of 10 million, and about 850 deaths, maybe 900 deaths. So right now, Georgia, okay, they've been open up for, I guess, a little over a week, or about a week. I think a week today. And they've gone from about almost 900 deaths to 1,100 deaths. So they have 108 deaths per million people, as opposed to New York, which has 1,200 deaths per million people. So New York is just a shitstorm. But then again, with New York, it's mostly New York City. Unfortunately, right where I'm sitting, where there's the most deaths and there's the most deaths per million. Like New York City, there's a saying about New York City, you're always within 3 feet of a rat. And so I don't know what brilliant scientist determined that the average person in New York was always 3 feet from a rat, but it's not a really, like, was someone paid to come up with that statistic? It's not, but in any case, it's not a comforting statistic. And another reason why I think New York City real estate, LA real estate, and San Francisco real estate are going to tank after this pandemic is over. But if you go one level down, I think the real estate in other towns, don't be fooled into thinking they're going to crash. Because don't forget, there's trillions of dollars in stimulus, and it costs nothing to borrow money now because interest rates are so low. So if you think of all of like the second and third tier cities, like Kansas City, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Fort Lauderdale, Houston, Austin, Boulder, Colorado, the real estate there is going to go up because people are going to be leaving San Francisco for Boulder, Colorado. Colorado, I believe there's no state taxes. San Francisco, 13.9% in state taxes. San Francisco, 3 months of lockdown. Colorado, minimal lockdown, and plus it's all beautiful. So don't expect real estate to go down in other parts of the country. I think other than commercial real estate, like office, no one's going to offices anymore, so office real estate is going to be cheap. But city by city, unless you're in New York City, San Francisco, LA, I think real estate values are going to go up. So I wouldn't wait around if you're thinking of buying. But now I would never buy, I rent. But even there, I don't think rentals are going to go down so fast unless you rent right now, because right now there's still uncertainty and people are probably a little bit more eager to get a rental done now, and you could probably make a deal now than later. Then after the economy opens. Let me take a look at the question list. So I mentioned yesterday I was going to talk about if you're an entrepreneur or in anything, when is the perfect time to say yes? When is the perfect time to say no? Why would you say these things? So I've been on hundreds of business meetings where I had to travel to go to the meeting, which means I said, yes, I will meet you in Seattle, in Dallas, wherever you are. I think 100% of those I should have said no to. So here's the formula. When you're first starting in business, like when I first started my very first business, when I started my hedge fund, you're in learning mode. So think of a learning curve. A learning curve looks very much like an epidemic. At first there's exponential growth and then it plateaus. So that's the earning curve. That's a learning curve. So when I first start learning how to cook, say, I've got 1 million recipes to learn. And now in order to learn how to get the right flavor and which sauces work together, I start to plateau. So that's again, it looks like an S. First you don't learn, and then it's exponential, and then it plateaus. So it's an S curve. That's like a business too. When you first start a business, you learn so much so quickly, and your revenues start in the early stages of a business. Your revenues might be going up 100% a month or 100% a year, and then eventually it plateaus. But when you're on the steep part of the curve, whether you're learning something or whether you're an entrepreneur, you're going to say yes a lot more on the steep part, because only say yes to anything, not for business or for money. Only say yes if you're going to learn. So I would not now say yes to any business meeting, no matter how much money, because again, I know from experience, most business meetings don't work out. So, and anytime I've traveled for business, I always think, oh, well, I'm going to travel there. They're going to respect the fact that I traveled there. Doesn't work like that. They don't, as soon as you're out of the door, they completely forget about you. They forget that you have to travel another 3,000 miles now to get home just to meet them for 15 minutes. So only say yes to meetings or to opportunities or to even phone calls or to gigs or whatever if you're going to learn. Nothing is worth just the money, because money should be a byproduct of how much you're learning about your industry, how much you're learning about your business. Like even when I started making my first successful business, I was making websites for other companies, and my very first client, I made a diamond dealer's website. And again, I knew nothing about diamonds and I had no money in the bank. So I probably would have said yes to this no matter what for the money, but it was so valuable. Like this was 25 years ago. It was so valuable for me to sit down with this diamond dealer and learn everything he knew about diamonds so I could make his website. So saying yes to doing that website helped me learn enormous amounts about the diamond industry. And once you start to plateau, then you need to say no almost all the time, because it's going to, when you're even in your business, it's going to be harder for you to learn new things. As the business plateaus, it's going to be harder and harder for you to learn new things. So you have to actually seek out opportunities to learn. Not opportunities for money, but opportunities to learn. Because the more you learn, the more you're able to offer future customers and even past customers. And so start saying no almost all the time after you've had the steep growth curve in your business or your learning or whatever. Growth in business and growth in learning will happen at the same time. So when I was starting hedge fund business, I would always say I was learning, and I would always say yes to meet with every investor, and I'd always say yes to meet with other hedge funds, because I would learn so much about the industry and the business. I knew nothing about the business. So every meeting, didn't matter if I made money or not, I would learn an enormous amount, and that created so much knowledge. And I would say no to meetings where I wasn't going to learn. And now more than ever, I say no almost all the time. So when I first started doing stand-up comedy, if anybody asked me to perform, if any club or bar or city or whatever asked me to perform, I always said yes, because I was learning. Every time I got on stage, I was learning. Now I'm still learning, but it's plateaued a little bit. So I say no. Oh, if it's a random bar, I'll say no. If it's a club I don't really like, I'll say no. Because again, it's not worth it to do something just to do it. It's only worth it. Learning is the only asset you keep with you forever. Because even if I make some money someplace, eventually the money will go away, or I'll spend the money, or I could have used that time making money in some other way. Money goes away. But the knowledge that you learn from things, from saying yes, you keep forever. But again, in every industry, in every interest you have, you only want to say yes when you're on the steep part of the learning curve. Then you say yes to everything. But when it plateaus, say no to 95% of everything. Oh, can you meet me for a coffee to discuss this business idea? No. And you can even explain why. I only say yes when I'm on the steep part of the learning curve. Now I'm on the plateau part, so I'm kind of busy. So I have to say no, but send over your business idea via email and I might take a look at it. Can't be sure. I'm going to answer a question. Someone says, I'm a classical musician. Should I quit now? The answer is, I don't know. I mean, if you're a classical musician, you should start figuring out and let's say you love it. I mean, if you're asking this question, maybe you don't love it anymore. So I'll give you an example. My father was a classical musician. He went to University of Michigan in classical music. His first we paused for a second, but we're back. His family was immigrants, and he was the first person to go to college. He got into University of Michigan. His first language in America, even as a 7-year-old growing up in America, his first language was Yiddish. But he went to University of Michigan, got his bachelor's degree in classical music composition, but he knew how to play every instrument. And he got a master's degree, and he was going for the PhD. And he realized, and then before he got the PhD, he quit graduate school. And I asked him why, and he said I couldn't find any jobs related to this. So, but I don't think that's it. I think he just lost interest in being a classical musician. So you have to kind of ask yourself, what are the things that you're most curious about now? When you wake up in the morning, are you excited to learn more and do more with classical music? Because classical music's not going away. I mean, I don't know how much you make from performing, like from ticket sales and things like that, but there's so many opportunities to make money from music. You can make albums. You could have Zoom tours where you could have Zoom performances. I watched a classical music concert the other day where there were 20 people, 20 musicians, and they were all sitting at their home, and it was beautifully coordinated on Zoom, and they played this amazing, orchestral piece. So there's still opportunities for classical music. You should only quit if you find yourself not very curious anymore. So again, if you're I was talking yesterday about the podcast I did with Stephen Dubner, Question of the Day. It was a very popular podcast, and we were making a good amount of money from the ads because it was just the two of us. So we had no expenses. We made money on the ads, but we just decided to quit because we weren't learning anything new. Like, we would keep asking each other questions that we had already asked a year earlier. Maybe even 5 times we had already asked it. So if you're not learning, then you say no. So for instance, I'm trying to think of times I've said no. Oh, I've said no to podcast guests. So somebody might be a super celebrity, wants to come on the podcast, but if I can't figure out, well, what's the angle? Like, what am I going to learn? And by through me, what are the listeners are going to learn? If I can't find an answer, then it's a definite no. Unless it's like, I don't know, Oprah. I'll always have Oprah on, even if I don't feel like I'm going to learn anything. Oh, I probably would learn something from Oprah. But for instance, and I used to say yes to these people. I gave an example yesterday, like William Shatner. I didn't learn anything from him. And so now, if he asked to come on the podcast, I'd probably say no. If Chelsea Handler asked to go on the podcast, I would say no. I had her on before because I thought, oh, this will get a lot of downloads. But that was the wrong reason. Whenever you say yes for the wrong reason, it does not work out. So she got actually the least amount of downloads of all my guests of the prior year. And I should have said no because I didn't know what I was going to try to learn from her. Now, sometimes people will surprise you and teach you something, but most of the time if you're going to learn. If you're curious about someone, you're going to learn something. If you're not curious, you're not going to learn something. Someone asked a really great question, why do I rent? And some of you know the answer, but renting, everyone always says, aren't you just throwing money down the toilet when you rent? No, you're throwing money down the toilet when you buy a home. Because think about it. Let's say you buy, I'm just going to make up numbers. Let's say you buy $1 million home. Let's say you have to put $200,000 down. So that might be all of your money. And when are you ever going to see that money again? That's $200,000 you're just handing over. When are you going to see it again? Because if you sell the house, you're probably going to buy a new house. You're just going to move the money to the next house. You don't really know in advance if you're going to make a profit or not. Housing sort of goes up, but sometimes it goes down. Anyone who bought an apartment in New York City 3 years ago is losing money right now. So you put $200,000 down on $1 million house, and then you borrow $800,000. $1 million house, by the time you finish paying that off, by the time you finish, and if you count all the property taxes and if you count all the maintenance, you've probably spent about between $4 and $5 million for that $1 million house. So buying a house, you're throwing out on interest. The tax credit doesn't matter. You're throwing out money on the interest, on property taxes, on maintenance. And here's the thing. You think you own your house, but you don't. If you stop paying the interest payments, the bank owns your house. If you stop paying the property taxes, the government owns the house. If you stop paying on maintenance, your house is going to fall apart. It's not going to be a pleasure to live in. And people always say to me, oh, well, the owner always passes all those charges to the renter. No, they don't, because rent is, like any market in capitalism, rent is determined not by what you think I should pay, but it's determined by supply and demand. So if rental prices go up and down, just like housing prices go up and down. So you can't tell me like, oh, you have to pay $3,000 a month rent because I have $2,000 a month in expenses. I don't care about your expenses. The same apartment down the street is going for $1,500, so I'm not going to pay $3,000, hypothetically. So you can't assume you're going to push the price, the costs of your ownership down to the renter, because rental prices change very frequently. And if you go into buying a house with that attitude, you're going to lose. Imagine if I said to you, hey man, I've got a stock you should buy. You should definitely buy this one stock. But here's how it's going to work. I want you to give me all of your money. Give me all your money, all of it. And then I want you to call the bank and borrow 400% more. You gave me X, now you're going to have to borrow 4X. And it's up to you. You're going to have to pay it back to the bank. And then you're going to buy this stock that I'm going to tell you about. And by the way, every year, you're going to have to pay a dividend to the stock rather than the stock paying you a dividend. If I gave you a stock tip like that, you would say, are you insane? That's crazy, James. I would never do that. But that's exactly what you do when you buy a home. So I prefer to rent because then I have all of this extra money to invest in myself through entrepreneurship or taking courses or reading or doing this podcast or whatever. And I have money to invest in either the stock market or private businesses or whatever. So I'm going to make much more money by not owning, by renting instead. And I get to move whenever I want. So when you own, the time when you most need to sell is the exact time you can't sell. So for instance, in 2001, when I wanted to sell an apartment, I couldn't. It's not like selling a stock where I just sell it. I couldn't sell the apartment because I lived right next to the World Trade Center. You people weren't even allowed to visit my apartment. So it was a part of the crime scene. So it's that's what's called illiquid. Whereas if I told you to buy a stock, it's liquid. You could sell it any day. So again, if you wouldn't make that kind of decision in any other area of your life, it's bad to make that decision with housing. Housing prices do not always go up. That is the mistake people made in 2006. The mistake people are making 3 months ago. It's the mistake I made in 2006, I should say, and it's the mistake I made in 1999. I've bought twice and lost both times, and maybe I'm an idiot with housing, but I'm probably just like the average home buyer where it's been really volatile. And people would always say, oh, my parents owned for 30 years. Yeah, if you bought in 1950, you made money. If you bought in 2006, you still might be down. If you bought in 2018, guaranteed you're down in New York City. So, that's why I rent. And you know what? I don't even like renting that much. I like Airbnb-ing, but sometimes renting is better than Airbnb-ing. What is something about me that most don't know? When I was a kid, I did try a little bit professional breakdancing. Most people don't know that, and I'm embarrassed to admit it. Okay, here's another thing. Well, I'll say that for another time. How do I keep sustained focus throughout the day? I think a couple things. And first off, it's very difficult to keep sustained focus throughout the day. But I think if you make everything a little bit, you always want to make things easier for yourself. So if I sit down and I say, oh my gosh, I've got to write a book today, that's not going to work. If I say, oh, I have an idea, maybe I'll write a chapter on when to say yes and when to say no. And I just tried it out on Instagram Live, maybe I'll write a couple of paragraphs. So that's a little bit easier of a goal. So I'll tell you a story Tony Robbins told me. So Tony Robbins, he had to teach a team of a unit of the Marines how to shoot better, how to hit closer to the bullseye. And he had never he didn't know anything about guns, he didn't know anything about shooting. So he interviewed a lot of teachers about shooting, but then he had an idea. So he had all the Marines line up. He put the target with the bullseye 1 foot away. And he said, hit the bullseye. And they were all like, are you kidding me? And then he's like, no, hit the bullseye. And so they all shot, they all hit the bullseye. He moved it another foot back, hit the bullseye. They shot, He moved it another foot back. And he just kept doing this, and he wouldn't move it another foot back unless they hit the bullseye a bunch of times. And eventually, at 60 feet, they were all hitting the bullseye. His unit was the best out of all the teams competing, and all the teachers that were competing to see who could teach these Marines the fastest. So he won that competition. And I always say, bring the bullseye as close as possible. So if you want to stay focused, I can't say, well, I'm going to read this entire book today. I could say maybe I'm going to read 1 page, maybe 2 pages. And if I like it, I'll keep going. If I don't like it, I'll switch. Okay, good job, well done. I read that page. And then I'll switch to another thing. Sometimes when I lose focus, I'll start playing online chess, or I'll start looking at news. I know what my bad habits are. My bad habits are to play online chess, or my bad habits are to, look at the latest notifications on Twitter. And I'll catch myself. I shouldn't play chess. I should find another thing to focus on. Now, if I don't want to find that other thing, maybe I'll get up and I'll rest a little bit, or I'll take a walk around the block. The time I would have played 5 or 6 games of chess, I could have walked around the block, and that's a much healthier way to relax and get focus back. And if you're losing focus, it's important to do activities that will help you get focus back. You need to rejuvenate. So even in my calendar, I'll sometimes put 15-minute or 20-minute blocks where I'm going to rejuvenate, because there are some days, and this has been happening to me lately, where I go from podcast to podcast to podcast to meeting to meeting to meeting, and it's too much. I can't go from one thing to another all day long. So I focus by scheduling in specifically between meetings a 20-minute block here, a half-hour block, a 15-minute block. Otherwise, I'll lose focus, because I lose focus a lot, and I always need something to keep me interested. And if I'm not, and I also need breaks all day long. It's very important to take breaks, and it's very important not to waste time during those breaks. So, there's 2 ways to waste time. You waste time in your activities that are important, and you waste time when you're relaxing. So you can for me, I waste time relaxing by playing a game online, when it's much better to take a walk around the block, or call a friend, or see my kids, or whatever. How do I handle information overwhelm? That is a good question. The way I handle it is, I have what I call an attention diet. I will not read the news. I will not watch the news. I will not go to CNN.com. I won't go to the front page of Yahoo Finance. I won't go to FoxNews.com or MSNBC.com. I won't go to the WallStreetJournal.com. There is no news that is accurate enough for me to want to look at it. What I will do is let's say there's somebody I trust in a certain area. I'll see what that person is linking to on their Twitter account, and I'll read what they're linking to, because that's a better way to get information. Or for instance, with the coronavirus, instead of going to the news to see the latest updates, I go straight to the data. If there's a research paper, I'll go straight to the page of the professor who did the research paper to see if he has a summary. If there's if the newspaper is saying, I never look at what the newspaper says about, deaths have tripled or whatever. I go to worldometers.com or statista.com and get the actual data. So how do I balance mental meandering that may generate new ideas and focusing on tasks? Well, I guess the question is, how do you balance balance coming up with ideas with executing? So it's every day. One of the first things I do every day is I'll read. It's a discipline. I'll read every day, and I'll write 10 ideas a day down. So I always do that. I never not do that. I never not write 10 ideas a day down. And that's it. I don't need to exercise my idea muscle more than that. I'll come up with ideas throughout the day just because I trust myself, that I have faith that I've exercised my idea muscle. And by the way, the idea muscle will atrophy and shrink within days if you don't write 10 ideas a day down. But I know that for the rest of the day, I've got my idea muscle all revved up. I don't need to balance that off. I've already done my 10 ideas of the day, and now I'll decide what tasks I need to execute on, and then I'll start executing. So that's how I balance it, is that first thing in the morning, that's when I exercise the idea muscle. And then everything you do involves coming up with ideas. Now, there's also something to be said for exploring, and that's how you come up with some ideas. But I read every day, so reading, there's two ways to kind of improve yourself. One is doing things, and the other is reading things. So doing is very valuable because you get yourself an experience that you've never had before. So you can't think your way to being a good piano player. You have to actually do. You have to play the piano every single day, and that's how you become a good piano player. I can't think, oh, if I play like this, I'll be better. No, you have to do it. Thinking doesn't work. Doing works. But reading, for many activities, reading also works. So reading is like, I don't have to do something. Somebody else did something, and I get to absorb all that knowledge. So for instance, Nassim Taleb had the experiences that allowed him to write Anti-Fragile. I don't have to have those experiences. I could read this book, and it's as if I'm a vampire. I've sucked Nassim Taleb's experiences out of this book like I'm a vampire, and now I don't have to spend the 20 years it might have taken him to learn the principles that make up that book. I don't know as much as him, but I'll know maybe a third or a fourth as much because I read the book where he poured all of his 20 years of experience into this book. And being a vampire, I absorb it. So then the next day I'm able to come up with better ideas because I've just been a vampire on this author or that author or the next author. So you always want to see, and again, this is one of those things that teaches you how to say yes. If you could be a vampire and absorb someone else's life into yours, then say yes to that. If not, then no. Do I think the price of rent will start going down? Yes, in New York City, LA, and San Francisco. No, everywhere else. Like if you're thinking of moving to Florida, rent's going up. If you're thinking of moving to Austin, Texas, rent's going up. If you're thinking of moving to Boulder, Colorado, rent is going up. Because everyone is with remote, don't forget, everyone who lives in New York is now being told to work remotely. So I was talking to someone the other day who works for a big corporation, and she was saying to me, I don't need to go back to work anymore. I'm more productive at home, actually. So offices in New York are going to start shutting down, which means there's less reason for people to live in New York. And restaurants are going to close in New York. And comedy clubs are going to close in New York. And Broadway is going to have theaters close in New York. So there's going to be less reason to live in New York, San Francisco, LA, the big cities. And so rents here are going to go down. Now, that might be good because maybe some people have a dream. I want to live in New York City. Well, you'll be able to do that more cheaply over the next year. Let's see. Someone says, I was scared to renegotiate on a rental I was going to get before the pandemic. 2 bedrooms in my building. You think I can take that risk? Well, yes. I think now is the time to negotiate. Here's what I would do. Let's say I wanted to negotiate on this place. I would say, hey, I'll rent this place for 18 months or 2 years, but I want to lock in a price 10% lower or 20% lower. And I bet you I have a reasonable chance. Or you can look at on Zillow.com or wherever, StreetEasy.com. You can look for rentals and they tell you, oh, this rental's been on the market for 18 months or this rental's been on the market for 190 days. That's great. Call them up now before the pandemic's over because they're not getting any. You always want to be the only person who's calling them. They're not getting any calls during this quarantine. So call them now and say, hey, I'll take this off your hands, but I'll lock it in for 2 years. I want 20% discount. Worst case is they say no. You have no risk in doing this. Now, if you already are renting, then whatever. But you could say, like, I'm already renting this place. I could call up the owner and I could say, hey, I'd like to lock in the next 2 years, 20% less, and I could just see what happens. Now, somebody says, this is like a real estate one. What if you buy a house to rent it out? No. Again, you have to get the house. You have to be really good at buying a house cheap. You have to understand the principles of investing because what you're trying to do is, if you're buying a house to be your home, you're willing to overpay. Like, okay, there's a lot more value here. It's not an investment. My kids are going to grow up here, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to retire here, whatever. But if you're looking at a house as an investment, meaning you're going to get cash flow out of it, you don't want to pay This is just a rule of thumb. Please do not pay more than 10 times what you would make from annual rent. So if you can rent a place for $3,000 a month, so $36,000 a year, do not pay more than $360,000 for that place. If it's for sale for $500,000, just say no to that. If you're only going to be able to get $3,000 a month rent, $36,000 a year, do not pay more than $360,000. In fact, I would say don't pay more than 8 times, which is about $300,000 or $316,000. But so try not to pay more than 8 times, but definitely do not pay more than 10 times what's called your rent roll, how much you would make from it in rent per year. And that's a very important rule. At the height of the real estate market in 2006, people were paying 20 times rent roll for houses and buildings and so on. And they all lost money. So it's just a horrible, horrible, horrible thing to do. And I've also learned this from the hard way from experience. But also, here's how you buy a house. Don't just look at the listings. Go to the local probate court in your state and see who's getting a divorce. Well, where do they live? They might need to sell the house for a discount in an emergency. Who just died? Well, the family might not want to own the house anymore and they'll sell it to you at a discount. Who has a tax lien against them? Well, they might want to sell their house cheap because they can't pay their taxes and the government's about to seize their place. So look for death, divorce, debt, and that's how you will get a good discount on a house or on a business that you're buying or whatever. Death, disease, debt. And it's horrible to think in such morbid ways, but trust me, if you do not think this way, you won't get a good discount and you'll end up paying more than 8 times rent roll and it won't work out to be a good investment. Can I do a Flippa masterclass on how to choose the best businesses during these times? Yes, I can. That's a good idea. But I'll give you one rule of thumb. Try not to, 2 things. Try not to pay more than 2 times earnings. So let's say an e-commerce site makes $1,000 a month profit. Okay, so that means $12,000 a year profit. Try not to pay more than $24,000 for that site. Rule number 2. Make sure that the owner is not, the current owner is not needed. He doesn't have relationships that are the source of the profit. You have to do due diligence. You have to do a background check. You have to make sure you could run the business without the owner and without losing any earnings. You have to make sure the trend in earnings was not going down already, in which case don't pay 2 times earnings, pay less than 1 times earnings. So you have to do all this due diligence to make sure that the earnings are really intact. Rule number 3, don't pay all the money up front. Because let's say that business makes $12,000 a year profit and you pay $24,000 and then the owner disappears. Well, what if there's a problem that you didn't do? What if the domain, you forgot to get the domain name? Or what if the hosting provider goes out of business and you don't know what to do? Or what if the relationships, it turned out, did depend on the owner? So the customers did depend on who the owner was. You want to pay it over time. So in my podcast with Carl Allen, he said something like 90% of businesses just shut down. They don't sell. They shut down. So if somebody's been at a jewelry store for 40 years, he doesn't sell the jewelry store. Most of the time, he just shuts it down and he retires. So most businesses, if you just come up to them and say, hey, I'd like to buy your business. I'll pay you 2 times earnings, but I don't want to pay it up front. I'll pay it out over 4 years. They're going to say yes because their only other alternative is to just shut it down. That's the average alternative. So there's nothing wrong. If let's say I want to buy a jewelry store, I'll go to 20 jewelry stores. I'll offer 2 times earnings, and I'll say, look, I don't want to pay it all. I'll pay you whatever you want, the 2 times earnings, up to 2 times earnings, or 2.5 times earnings. I'll pay you whatever you want, but I'm not going to pay it all up front. Maybe I'm going to pay 10% up front, 20% up front, and I'll pay it out over time, over 4 years. And I stop paying, and if at any point I stop paying, you can take the business back, because if the business falls apart, you could just take it back. So I have no risk. They have no risk because they were going to shut it down anyway. It's a win-win situation. So that's how I would buy one of these Flippa businesses. There's more details, which I'm happy to give a class on at some point. But those are the main rules. If you just do those 3 things I said, then you could find a good flip of business. What am I reading right now? So I'm always trying to read good nonfiction and good fiction. So unfortunately, this stand is on the book that I'm reading right now, but it's called These Truths, A History of the United States by Jill Lepore. And so Jill Lepore is a historian who's a professor at Harvard. This book's like a billion pages. It's very thick, but I'm learning so much that I did not learn in school about the history of the US. And I'm always kind of a history buff. But again, this is the thing. Jill Lepore spent 40 years studying, and the bibliography in this book, all the books she's read to write this book, the bibliography alone is like 60 pages. So I'm getting all of those 60 books and her life experience, and I'm sucking it in. And I'm like the vampire, which I'm sucking the life out of Jill Lepore, and I'm getting her knowledge of the United States without having to spend the 40 years and reading the 60 books. Just by reading this book. Now, I'm not going to know everything she knows, but I'm going to know a fair percentage anyway. And I'm reading a novel right now by James Frey. It's a really great novel. It's a modern look at, it's called The Final Testament of the Holy Bible, and but it takes place in today's times, and it's about a maybe Messiah who's this kind of homeless-looking, maybe insane guy. And it's just, I love James Frey's writing style so much. By the way, this is about the 5th time I'm reading this novel. And because I always reread great novels. There's not that many great novels out there. And I always reread great novels because it makes me a better writer. So not only do I get the story, but again, I'm like a vampire. I suck in James Frey's writing style like a vampire. And now I have just a tiny bit of how he writes. So I always love anything fiction or nonfiction where I could be a vampire, I'm good. Do you need to be an accredited investor to buy a small business? That's a good question. I don't think so. I don't think you need to do. Where did I learn about negotiation? Well, negotiation is one of those things where everybody thinks they're good, but actually nobody is very good. And so it's only like through, I would say, a good 30 years of trial and error that I learned about negotiation. I thought I was good, but I was a horrible, when I look back on it now, I was such a bad negotiator for so long. But again, I described this a couple weeks ago. The best thing you could do in a negotiation is this one technique. I call it the advice technique. You're sitting down for a negotiation. Let's say you're sitting down with your boss and you say, hey boss, I've been doing twice as much work lately. I think I deserve a raise. And the boss says, okay, well, you tell me, what do you want to make? Let's see if we could do it. And he acts all friendly and he says that to you. And you say, I always, in that situation, and there's a lot of debate about what the right technique is here, but this is what I do. I always say, listen, I've been working really hard. That's why you should give me a promotion and a raise, because I've been working so hard. But I've been keeping my head really focused. You're the expert at you, the boss, are the expert at figuring out raises and salaries and all that kind of stuff. I don't know anything about that. Give me advice. If you were me, what would you ask for? Now, note, I didn't say to him, what do you think I should make? I said to him, what do you think I should ask for? So I'm still going to be the one to ask the number that I want, for the raise. I'm not letting him decide. I'm asking him advice. So what that does is, when you ask for advice, you're saying several things to him at the same time. You're saying, you're smarter than me at this, which is a nice thing for people to hear. You're saying, you have status over me, so I'm coming to you for advice because you know more than me. And you're also saying, I trust you not to screw me over here. And not that your boss would screw you over, but he certainly doesn't want to pay you the maximum amount. But now that you've asked him for advice and now that you trust him, he's not going to give you bad advice, because later on you could think, oh, he gave me bad advice. He doesn't want you thinking that. He's flattered that you trust him and that you're giving him this status and that maybe you're even friends with him. And so he's going to want to give you good advice. He's going to say, well, if I were you, I was kind of like you when I was younger, and here's how I thought about it. And you could say, well, what does that mean? and he'll give you good advice. And then here's another trick. So let's say you're making $50,000 a year, and he says, I think you should ask for a 10% raise, $55,000. And then you could say, well, I was thinking more like $200,000 a year. And, he'll laugh, whatever, it's a joke. But what you just did there is a cognitive bias. So cognitive biases are these brain almost hiccups that Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in behavioral finance, he won the Nobel Prize for economics for creating the field of behavioral finance, he realized that there are sometimes these biases that make people think irrationally, and you can take advantage of them if you know them. So there's a cognitive bias called anchoring. So if I say to him, let's say after he gives me the advice, ask for a 10% raise, go from $50,000 to $55,000. If I said to him, well, I was thinking more like I deserve $10,000, well, he's going to start thinking, even though it was a joke, his brain doesn't really know the difference between a joke and a fact. So his brain, that's what makes jokes funny, is that there's this tension between your brain that only thinks things are facts and reality. And it's the coming together of that tension that makes something funny. So if you just say $10,000, I was thinking I should make $10,000, you should demote me. Of course, that's a joke, but now his brain thinks that's a fact. His brain thinks that's what you really said. So he's not going to give you more. He just said $55,000. He's not going to give you more than that. But if I say, I think I should make $300,000 a year. I think I'm worth $300,000 a year. And you stare at him like it's a real serious thing. And then you start to laugh. Oh, it's a joke. So you break the tension. But you kept it alive long enough that the brain, he's in some kind of cognitive dissonance. His brain thinks you just seriously asked for $300,000, but he doesn't want to give you that, and he doesn't know yet if it's a joke. You let him think that for a few seconds, then you laugh. You just did a technique called anchoring. So that's a cognitive bias called anchoring. And now you say, no, I'm just kidding. But I am doing twice as much work. How about we say $59,000 a year? I didn't say 60, I said 59. He's going to just agree. This is the best negotiating technique I've ever used. And by the way, I've done negotiations worth millions of dollars using the advice technique combined with the anchoring technique. I don't need any other techniques, but I'll give you one more technique. And hello to Evan Carmichael. Always check out Evan Carmichael's video channel. It's the best. Evan, you're on there right now. People should ask you questions. Evan always has 10 lessons I learned from Steve Jobs, 10 lessons I learned from Tony Robbins, 10 lessons I learned from this idiot James Altucher. And it's always, I just love watching your videos. Evan, welcome to the IG Live. So I just gave 2 negotiating techniques. The advice technique, which is very powerful. If all you do is that, you're going to win negotiations. Then the anchoring technique. And there's a third technique that was taught me by a really great negotiator. And his name is, this is a coincidence because I saw him in the news today, but I haven't spoken to him in 22 years. But Dr. Larry Brilliant. And you might have heard of Dr. Larry Brilliant, and that's his real name. It's like a name of an evil villain somehow. But Dr. Larry Brilliant, he was an epidemiologist, and he eradicated smallpox in India in the 70s. And then he became a tech entrepreneur, and we co-invested in some deals together a long time ago. And he reported me to the FBI, and the FBI actually visited my apartment and asked me what I could tell them about Osama bin Laden. And I'm like, why would I know anything about Osama bin Laden? And the FBI said, well, Dr. Larry Brilliant told us you might know something about Osama bin Laden. And so I still don't really forgive him for that because I don't know anything. But Dr. Larry Brilliant told me this one technique, and we were at a coin show. He collected coins. We were at this ancient coin show on the top floor of the World Trade Center, and he was negotiating on these ancient coins, like biblical coins with like King Solomon on the coin or whatever. And he said to me, when you're negotiating, always make sure your list of terms is bigger than the other person's list. This is really important. So if for instance, in the example I gave about salary, I didn't use this technique. So when you're saying, when I say to a boss, hey, I would like a raise, I would like a promotion and a raise, he's now just thinking one item on his list. the raise, money. But you could be thinking, oh, my list is going to be bigger. I'm going to ask for better healthcare, better 401k matching, better vacation time, maybe a higher title, maybe a bigger office. So make your list as big as possible so you know your list is bigger. And then you can give up, as Larry, I'm just using Larry Brilliant's words, you can give up the nickels for the dimes. So if you say, look, I want a promotion, I want to be a senior vice president instead of a vice president, I want an office that's twice as big, I want my own secretary, and the boss is like, oh my gosh, I can't give you a bigger office, all the offices are taken. And you'd be like, okay, well then let's make the salary $61,000 instead of $59,000. You're giving up the nickels, but you're taking the dimes. So these three techniques, the advice technique, the anchoring technique is very psychological and powerful, and it works. It doesn't seem like it'll work, but it works. And then make your list bigger. The whose list is bigger technique. I have used that technique, whose list is bigger. I can guarantee you it works. It's like a magic technique to drive up the things that you really value by just having a bigger list of things you're negotiating than the person you're negotiating against. One more technique, I'll give a fourth technique, which is don't be afraid to be silent. So let's say I'm using the whose list is bigger. So I say, I want a bigger office. And he says, no, I can't. I wish I could give you a bigger office. I can't. It's like, okay, let's move me up to $61,000 a year instead of $59,000 a year. Then just be silent. Nobody likes silence. Nobody. So he will fill the silence. He will eventually break the silence, and he'll say, well, I can do 60,000 maybe. And then you can go back to your other thing. You could say, well, give me advice here, because I really, not only did I want the larger office, the 60,500 is fine, but not only did I want the larger office, but I wanted an extra week of vacation time. What can I do? How can we work together on this? Give me advice. And then he's like, I can't give you an extra week of vacation time. And then I'd be like, okay, well, I'm fine then. I won't take the extra week of vacation time, but let's make it 61,500. And then he'll say, okay, well, let's just meet in the middle at 61,000. By the way, negotiating because you plan on meeting in the middle is the worst negotiating technique, because everyone knows you're doing that. So don't always say reality. Don't say a price that you know you're saying it just to meet in the middle, because then they're not going to move, because they know that you're playing that game. So never do the let's meet in the middle technique. So that's a very important thing. Now, I think I only have a few more minutes, but I still have more questions here. A remote online chess platform. So I was talking to Gary Kasparov, who's the best chess player in history, and very great guy and a good friend. And he suggested to me, so I was using the Internet Chess Club, which I had helped create in 1992. I wrote part of the software for it, and I've been using it ever since. But I've just switched. He suggests go to chess.com. He says that's where I play. This is where Gary Kasparov, the best chess player in the world, plays. So I figured, okay, I'll try it. But I haven't tried it yet. I've been using lichess.org, lichess.org. I've been playing there. And there's also a lot of good grandmasters and masters there. So that's a good chess platform. Is copywriting a good skill to learn? So copywriting, I don't know if you know what it is. Copywriting is the ability to write an email ad or to write headlines or whatever so that people feel compelled to buy what you're selling. And I am not a copywriter. I consider myself a writer and not a copywriter. It's very different skills. Copywriters know all of these cognitive biases to use in writing to get the customer to buy. I hate the copywriting style, but if you're going to learn any skill, learn copywriting. I know copywriters, so here's how a copywriter does it. So a copywriter might say to someone, hey James, I'll sell an investment newsletter for you. I'll write all the copy and stuff. I'll make all the ads, but I get 3% of the gross revenues of this product. And I'll be like, sure, go for it, because I won't have any revenues unless I have a good copywriter. And I know copywriters who have made, on my products alone, they've made millions and millions of dollars over the years. So copywriting is such a great skill. Here's the other thing. You could go into any industry. you can go tomorrow to your local dentist and say, hey, let me write some copy for you, and we'll email it to all the local residents. And then if it works, and you'll test, you could send two letters out. This group gets this copy, this group gets this copy, whichever one wins, and if it does work, and the dentist is really happy, now you can take that exact same copy and you can sell it to the 50,000 other dentists around the country, because they're all local, so they're not competing against each other. You could use the exact same copy, and you can make money over and over and over again in any industry. You could write copy for a flower store. You could write copy for an online course, an online newsletter, a dentist's office, an optician's office, a real estate agent. You could, and then if it works, you just duplicate it over and over and over again throughout that industry. So copywriting, you can make. There is no reason you should not make millions of dollars if you know copy. So, you know what's funny? We have 1 minute left. The time is already coming up. I do have a whole list. It was my 10 ideas list today. I have a whole list of kind of interesting and unique business models that I did want to share, but I don't want to start it right now. So maybe I'll ask another. I'll do it. Today's Thursday. I'll do it tomorrow's Friday, 2 p.m. Instagram Live. I definitely will share these business models. I'll answer another question real quickly. Is it smarter to go back to the job that furloughed you, or stay on? Whoops! I accidentally clicked on an Azalea Banks video. 212, great rap song. Let me find the question again. So, is it smarter to go back to the job that furloughed you, or stay on unemployment until jobs come back? I don't know. If you like your job, go back to it. If you're a janitor in an elementary school, absolutely stay on unemployment and take a course on copywriting after what I just told you. Take a course on photography. Take a course on programming or whatever. Like, do not go back to a crappy job if you're making more on unemployment than you were making at the job. Because why would you? Like, a job, a standard job, and some people love their jobs and that's fine. But if you don't love your job, a job is nothing more than a human domestication program. It's you go in there, they give you this thick manual that you have to read. They tell you what clothes you're allowed to wear. They tell you what little place you have to sit for 8 hours a day. They tell you what words you're allowed to use. They tell you how you can talk to the opposite sex. They tell you when you can when you can eat, when you can leave, where you should sit in the lunchroom. I don't know. I wouldn't go back to a job if I could get paid for sitting at home. I'm just being honest. Like, I would take the money for as long as possible, but learn copywriting, or do research one of these businesses that I'm going to describe to you tomorrow, or go on flippa.com or empireflippers.com, figure out a business to buy. There is a million things you could do. Don't forget the 3 most addictive things: heroin, carbs, and a stable salary. And we all learned that. If you were furloughed, you learned that. You thought your stable salary was good, and then suddenly a pandemic happens, no loyalty at all. See you later. We might hire you back when this is over, but we might not. You're going to have to worry every single day before we tell you, because they might lie to you the whole time. So there's no reason to go back to a regular job if you could right now use this time to play around with other businesses, or I'm going to tell you at least 5 different business models tomorrow. Here's what I'm going to do. Tomorrow, Instagram Live, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. But this one, which we talked all about negotiating, I answered a whole bunch of questions about housing and renting, how you should buy a house, how you should buy a flippa or an e-commerce business, what you should do about, how to ask for a raise, what am I reading, how do I stay focused, and tricks for that. But I will save this on my Instagram stories. If you go to Instagram stories and click live, you'll see this for the next 24 hours. It'll take me a few minutes to upload it, or a half hour to upload it. And I also put all of these IG lives on YouTube. So find these IG lives on YouTube, and I will see you tomorrow, 2 p.m. First thing I do is I will go over all these new business models and that I've been thinking about, business models that I'm excited about, and I hope you will be as well. And then I'll answer questions and tell some fun stories, and maybe break dance a little, but probably not. Thanks so much, everybody. I will see you tomorrow.